The Velker ascendant dropped out of hyperspace above Earth's moon with the casual arrogance of a species that had never lost a war. Commander Redis Vaughn stood at the observation deck, her eyes tracking the blue marble below, mandibles clicking in something like satisfaction. "Population estimate?" he asked. 11 billion, his tactical officer, Sale, replied. "Primitive fusion technology. No fleet presence beyond low orbit. This will be over before the second moon rises." Redis had conquered 14 worlds in his career. He knew the pattern: arrive, demonstrate overwhelming force, offer terms, accept surrender. Humans, according to 3 decades of surveillance data, were quarrelsome, tribal, and utterly unprepared for a coordinated extraterrestrial threat. The Velker Compact had watched humanity bicker over borders and ideologies for generations. Weak, divided, ready to fall. "Send the ultimatum," Redis ordered. "Standard format. Surrender within 1 rotation, or we begin orbital bombardment of unpopulated regions as demonstration." The message went out in 43 human languages, translated by algorithms that had been quietly harvesting Earth's broadcasts for years. The response took 6 hours. Redis had expected panic, pleading, perhaps a fractured mess of contradictory replies from competing governments. Instead, he received a single video file, forwarded through every major communications network on the planet simultaneously, as though humanity had, for the first time in its recorded history, agreed on something instantly and without debate. The video showed a man in a gray uniform standing in front of a plain blue backdrop, sharp-jawed and unhurried. "This is Fleet Admiral Orion Cade, United Earth Defense Coalition. To the vessel currently in lunar orbit, we've received your message. We're going to have to decline." Redis felt his mandibles still. Decline. That's it. No terms discussion, no counteroffer. Sales sounded almost offended. "Play it again," Redis said. "There must be more context." There wasn't. The message ended there. 31 seconds of footage, no elaboration, no fear. What the Velker Compact hadn't accounted for, what their surveillance had entirely missed, was that humanity's fractiousness was not weakness. It was rehearsal. For 12,000 years, humans had been practicing violence against each other with an intensity and creativity no other species in the galaxy had ever needed to develop, because no other species had ever needed to. The Velker had unified under a single banner 3 million years ago and hadn't fought a real war since. Their military doctrine was built on intimidation, not innovation, because intimidation had always worked. It had never worked on humans. It had simply never had the chance to. 6 hours was not humanity panicking. 6 hours was humanity's 17 largest military powers, several of whom had spent the last century pointing nuclear arsenals at one another, holding an emergency joint session and discovering, for the first time in history, an enemy they could all agree on unanimously and immediately. "Bring the fleet in," Redis ordered, 12 hours after the refusal. Full show of force. Orbital positioning above every major population center. Let them see what defiance costs. The Velker fleet descended. 40 capital ships, each larger than anything humanity had ever built, arranged in a slow, deliberate formation designed to be visible from every continent at once. It was a display that had ended 6 previous conflicts without a single shot fired. The humans didn't look up and surrender. They looked up and started counting. Dr. Naira Voss sat in the underground command center beneath the Rockies, watching thermal imaging of the alien formation scroll across 4 dozen monitors. Around her, a room of engineers, physicists, and military strategists worked with the quiet, focused intensity of people who had spent decades preparing for a scenario everyone had publicly dismissed as science fiction. "They're spread thin," she said. "Look at the spacing. They expect us to shoot at the fleet as a whole. They're not expecting distributed, asymmetric targeting." "Because nobody does that," said General Okafor, arms crossed behind her. "Distributed targeting only makes sense against an enemy who doesn't fear retaliation." "Exactly," Naira said. "They've never fought anyone who wasn't afraid to lose." Earth's actual defense wasn't the visible one. The aging satellites and conventional naval assets the Velker scans had already cataloged. It was the 800 kinetic interceptor platforms built into decommissioned mining asteroids over the past 11 years, disguised as debris, invisible to any scan that wasn't specifically looking for engineered stealth signatures. It was the railgun arrays hidden beneath 3 oceans, built under the cover of climate infrastructure projects. It was the fact that humanity, upon first confirmed contact with the Velker Compact 22 years earlier, a contact the public was never told about, had spent every year since preparing not for negotiation, but for exactly this moment. Humans hadn't survived this long by being trusting. Authorize Iron Veil, Naira said, and reached for the comm line that would put her directly in contact with Admiral Cade's command ship, hidden in the lunar shadow the Velker scanners had never thought to check. Redis felt the first impact before Sail could report it. The Ascendant lurched, alarms cascading across the bridge in a rising wall of sound. Report. Kinetic strikes. Multiple vectors. They're not firing from the surface, they're firing from inside our formation. The asteroid platforms, positioned months in advance along predictable orbital paths, had drifted silently into the exact space the Velker fleet would occupy, because human intelligence agencies had been intercepting Velker communication patterns for 2 decades and had learned, with terrifying precision, how an intimidation-based fleet chose to arrange itself. Redis had shown Earth exactly where his ships would be. Humanity had simply been there first, waiting. Return fire. Target the launch platforms. We can't get a clean lock. They're camouflaged as debris fields. We're wasting ordnance on rock. A second wave hit, then a third. Not concentrated, coordinated. 14 different attack vectors striking in a rhythm that gave the Velker point defense systems no consistent pattern to adapt to. Rethus's people had trained for war as a demonstration. These were not demonstrations. These were kill shots, calculated by minds that had spent their entire history learning how fragile the human body was and building weapons to end arguments permanently. Sir, Sail's voice had lost its earlier confidence. The Voskarn is gone. The Illarath is losing atmosphere on 6 decks. Redis stared at the tactical display, watching casualty projections climb in real time. In 14 conquests, he had never seen a native force respond within the first hour, let alone inflict damage this severe. Signal full retreat to high orbit, he said. Reassess. They're not letting us disengage, Sail said. Something's climbing toward us from the surface, multiple somethings. The railgun projectiles reached orbital altitude 9 minutes later, fired on Orion's order the moment Naira's models confirmed the Velker formation had locked its retreat vector. Redis understood, watching his flagship's shields fail under sustained fire from weapons his intelligence reports had assured him did not exist, that the Velker Compact had made a catastrophic error in the very first premise of the invasion. They had assumed a fractured species was an unprepared one. 3 days later, what remained of the Velker fleet limped back into hyperspace with 11 of 40 ships intact. Redis sat alone in his quarters, reviewing the final transmission he'd received from Earth before departure. Not a gloat, not a threat, just Admiral Cade's voice, calm as it had been from the start, with Naira Voss standing silently at his shoulder in the frame. You'll want to tell your superiors something, Orion had said. We're not looking for a war. We never wanted this fight. But if you send another fleet, understand this. We've spent our entire history fighting each other, and we got very, very good at it. The only thing that's changed is who we're pointing it at now. Choose your next move carefully. Redis didn't send another fleet. Across 100 worlds in the following years, the story spread through Velker Compact command channels and hushed, uncertain briefings. A species that argued with itself constantly, that could never agree on anything, had unanimously agreed to fight back within 6 hours, and had turned its own history of internal conflict into the most efficient war machine anyone had encountered. 2 names surfaced again and again in the intercepted reports. The admiral who had refused before the enemy had even finished arriving, and the scientist who had known exactly where to place the trap. The galaxy had spent its surveillance decades cataloging humanity's divisions as weakness. They had never once considered that a species which had spent 12,000 years learning to fight each other had, in the process, become terrifyingly good at fighting anyone. Earth didn't win because it was strong. Earth won because it had never, not once in its bloody, complicated history, been anything else.